Isabella Carter was the kind of woman whose quiet strength spoke volumes. At 29, she carried the weight of her family like an anchor tied to hope, graceful, determined, and gentle to a fault. Raised in a modest two-bedroom home in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood, Isabella had taken on the role of second parent after their father died in a boating accident when she was 16. Her mother, Claudine, a literature teacher at a public school, worked tirelessly to provide for Isabella, Rebecca, and Caleb. Isabella pursued a degree in psychology with the dream of opening a center for women who, like her mother, had lost everything but still held on. She worked long hours at a local therapy clinic while volunteering at shelters on weekends. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Her greatest joy was protecting her siblings, especially rebellious Rebecca, who often stirred chaos without consequence, and gentle Caleb, who struggled with anxiety and quietly dreamed of becoming a novelist. The night Isabella met Damon Langford, she had just finished a late-night volunteer shift and almost skipped the charity gala she'd promised her supervisor she'd attend. She arrived in a borrowed dress and thrifted heels, wholly unprepared for the whirlwind that was about to unfold. Damon stood across the room like he belonged to another world, impeccably dressed in tailored navy, speaking animatedly to a circle of donors. When his eyes caught hers, it was as if the room faded. He walked straight over, complimented her smile, and asked if she believed in serendipity. They spent hours on the rooftop under string lights, swapping childhood stories, he, a foster care survivor who'd bounced through 10 homes and dreamed of building something lasting. She, a woman who fought to anchor everyone else but had no idea how to save herself. His vulnerability was intoxicating. Damon made her feel seen in ways no one had before. That night, he walked her home and left with a kiss on the hand and a promise to call the next morning. For weeks, Damon was everything Isabella never knew she needed. He brought her coffee at work, left notes in her purse, and listened when she talked about her frustrations with broken systems and the trauma buried in her clients. He told her she was brilliant, necessary, a light. Damon said he was launching a media tech company that would revolutionize digital storytelling. He just needed time and the right investor. Isabella never doubted him. She introduced him to her family, and while Claudine was skeptical, Rebecca was instantly charmed. Within 4 months, Damon moved into Isabella's apartment, promising to pay rent once his first big client signed. She believed him. After all, he was the first man who looked her in the eyes and said, "You and I are destiny." Isabella didn't realize then that destiny could be deception dressed in poetry. Life with Damon felt like living inside a slow-burning romance novel at first. Every morning, he'd kiss Isabella's forehead before she left for the therapy center, whispering encouragement like a prayer. He often cooked her favorite meals, garlic shrimp linguine or plant-based lasagna, and left her poems on napkins. They built routines, Sunday jazz and board games, late-night dancing in the living room, weekend drives along the coast where he spoke of opening media hubs worldwide. He talked a lot about his dream, a digital storytelling company that could give voices to the forgotten, and Isabella, ever empathetic, felt aligned with the mission. She introduced him to colleagues at her therapy clinic who worked in nonprofit media, even helped him sketch proposals late at night. Yet, despite the passion and talk of growth, Damon never brought home contracts, never shared the names of the investors he mentioned, and somehow always needed more time, more patience, more of her trust. Around this time, Rebecca, now 23, reappeared in Isabella's life like a whirlwind. After being expelled from a prestigious design school in Paris for plagiarism, an accusation she claimed was fueled by jealousy, Rebecca returned to Boston under the guise of starting over. Isabella, as always, welcomed her with open arms, offering her a place to stay until she found her feet. Rebecca moved into the guest room but soon made the entire apartment feel like hers. Her perfume lingered in the bathroom, her voice echoed through Damon's laughter, and her presence filled the spaces that once belonged to Isabella's peace. Damon insisted he was just being a big brother to her, saying she reminded him of the younger sister he lost in the foster system. But their inside jokes, whispered conversations in the kitchen, and the way he sometimes lingered on her photos raised silent questions Isabella never dared ask aloud. Trusting Damon, and her own blood, felt safer than confronting the growing unease. Despite her doubts, Isabella's career flourished. Her boss promoted her to assistant clinical director at the counseling center, impressed by her tenacity, compassion, and the workshops she'd initiated for trauma survivors. Clients adored her. She finally had the influence she'd worked years for. Meanwhile, Damon's startup still showed no tangible results, just more whiteboards filled with scribbled visions, more meetings that never led to revenue, and more bills that Isabella silently covered. Sasha Green, her closest friend since college, a sharp-witted paralegal, voiced her concerns directly. "You're building empires for him, Bella, while he's building castles in the air." But Isabella, the eternal optimist, always defended him. "He's been through so much," she'd say. "People like Damon just need someone to believe in them." What she didn't realize was that belief, when placed in the wrong hands, can become the sharpest weapon of betrayal. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when everything began to unravel. Isabella arrived home earlier than usual to surprise Damon with tickets to a speaker's symposium she knew he would love. But when she opened the apartment door, she found Damon frantically digging through a black duffel bag in the living room, papers flying everywhere. She froze. Scattered across the floor were sealed envelopes, flash drives, stacks of cash, and fake identification documents. Damon looked up, startled like a thief caught in the act. At first, he tried to laugh it off, claimed it was a prank for a friend's film script, but the tension in his eyes betrayed the lie. That night, he didn't sleep. And neither did Isabella. The next morning, the apartment intercom buzzed violently, "Federal agents." Before she could ask what was going on, Damon dropped to his knees and begged her to protect him. "They're here because of me," he whispered. "But I swear, if you take the fall, I'll fix everything." Isabella's heart split between love and logic. Damon told her that the stolen identities and money laundering had begun before they met, but now the net was closing. He pleaded with tears, saying if he went in, he'd rot, and they'd lose everything. He promised to rebuild their future and even proposed right there on the kitchen floor with trembling hands and no ring, just desperation. Then Rebecca entered the scene. She had apparently been briefed and supported Damon's plea. "Take the deal, Bella. You're innocent, they'll go easy on you. Damon will make it right," she coaxed, eyes glossy, voice eerily soft. Isabella's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but the weight of love, loyalty, and the constant hope she'd clung to for 3 years crushed her resistance. She agreed. The next morning, she was in handcuffs, her name dragged into a federal scandal involving cybercrime, tax fraud, and laundering through a phony nonprofit Damon had registered using her credentials. The trial moved swiftly, with Isabella painted as a calculating accomplice. Her lawyer tried to argue diminished knowledge and character evidence, but the federal prosecutors had enough digital traces to bury her, because Damon made sure of it. He never showed up in court, claiming illness. Rebecca vanished from public view. Isabella sat in a courtroom, her body present but her mind numb, as the judge handed down a 3-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. She glanced toward the back of the room one last time, hoping for a familiar face. There was none. As the guards led her away, a single, final betrayal stabbed her deeper than the sentence ever could. Damon had never meant to keep his promise. He hadn't just let her fall, he'd pushed her. And what Isabella didn't know then was that this wasn't the end. It was the birth of a storm. The gates of Ashford Federal Correctional Facility clanged shut behind Isabella like the final nail in a coffin. Stripped of everything, her career, her home, her freedom, she was now known as inmate number 67429. The first few weeks were a descent into emotional and physical hell. The fluorescent lights never dimmed, the food was barely edible, and the guards treated her with the same disdain reserved for hardened criminals. But it was the psychological isolation that tore at her sanity. The woman who once calmed trauma victims now found herself waking up in cold sweats from nightmares and suppressing sobs into a stained pillow. Every day she looked for a letter from Damon. Every day she received nothing. Her calls went unanswered. Her voice messages became desperate, until one day, the phone line was cut from her list entirely. Damon had blocked her. Just like that, the man she sacrificed everything for had erased her existence as if she were a stain he'd finally scrubbed clean. Her only respite came in the form of an older inmate named Nadine Brooks, a sharp-minded former financial analyst who had once run a Fortune 500 firm before being convicted of insider trading she swore she didn't commit. Nadine saw right through Isabella from day one. "You're not a criminal," she said during lunch one afternoon. "You're just someone who mistook love for loyalty." Nadine took Isabella under her wing, teaching her how to survive without losing her soul. She showed her how to navigate the prison politics, how to keep her head down, and how to read between the lines of people's stories. In return, Isabella listened. They swapped their traumas like confessions, and through that bond, Isabella slowly began to reclaim pieces of herself. Nadine told her, "Don't waste your time grieving the man who built your cage. Use it to design your escape, mentally first, then physically." And Isabella, though broken, began to listen. Months passed, and news trickled in. Her mother, Claudine, had died of a sudden stroke, brought on by stress, the letter read. No funeral was held for Isabella to attend. Rebecca never visited. Sasha wrote once, a letter filled with love, disbelief, and apologies for not seeing the truth earlier, but even Sasha had no idea where Damon or Rebecca had gone. Isabella spent nights in the prison library, scribbling in journals, replaying every moment that led her there. One evening, Nadine whispered to her about a trick to get evidence out of prison, a call to the outside with the right message. That same night, with trembling hands, Isabella played an old voicemail on her prison-monitored call, Damon's voice saying, "If you take the fall, I'll build our future." She repeated it again and again until the automated system caught and saved it. That recording would become her hidden weapon. She just didn't know when, or how, to use it yet. While Isabella counted days on a prison wall, Rebecca Carter lived as though her sister had never existed. Less than 5 months after Isabella's sentencing, Rebecca moved into a luxury penthouse in downtown Boston, paid in full by Langford Media Group, the company Damon now publicly owned. The same company that Isabella once helped conceptualize from scribbles and notes. In the media, Damon rebranded himself as a self-made visionary who had overcome betrayal by a former associate, subtly discrediting Isabella without naming her. Meanwhile, Rebecca became his dazzling partner in every sense. Magazine covers featured her as a rising star in women's entrepreneurship, calling her a fashion icon and philanthropist. She hosted gala events in honor of survivors, ironically those very women Isabella once served. When interviewers asked about her sister, Rebecca would shake her head solemnly and say, "Some people choose paths you can't follow. I choose light." Behind that polished image, however, was a woman haunted by shadows she pretended didn't exist. At night, Rebecca's dreams weren't peaceful. Sometimes she'd wake up drenched in sweat after dreaming of Isabella sitting silently across a prison table, eyes hollow and unreadable. She buried herself in glamour, designer brands, weekend getaways to St. Bart's, and spa retreats in Aspen, but her reflection never stopped flickering back to her sister's trusting smile, the one she had helped destroy. Damon, however, remained cold and focused. He discouraged any talk of Isabella, warning that even hinting at contact would jeopardize everything we've built. He was ruthless with staff, obsessive over image, and secretive about finances. Still, Rebecca stayed. She told herself she loved him, even as his affection grew mechanical. Sometimes, when she looked at their framed engagement photo, she wondered if Damon ever truly loved either of them, or just the convenience of two sisters, one to ruin and one to use. She tried to convince herself she'd been swept into survival, not betrayal. But deep inside, Rebecca knew the truth. And it was rotting her from within. Meanwhile, her relationship with their younger brother, Caleb, disintegrated. He had once idolized Rebecca, but now she dodged his calls, declined his messages, and sent him cold bank transfers as if that were a substitute for family. When he begged her to tell him what happened with Isabella, she snapped, saying, "You weren't there. You don't know what she became." Caleb, now struggling to pay for college while working odd jobs, stopped asking. Even Sasha's attempts to reach Rebecca were blocked. But secrets have a life of their own, they multiply in silence. and Rebecca's carefully constructed life had begun to grow cracks. On more than one occasion, she caught Damon texting someone in code, whispering phone calls in locked offices. She noticed cash withdrawals she hadn't approved. Her smile in interviews became strained. The empire she and Damon shared wasn't built on success, it was built on sand, soaked in lies. And deep down, Rebecca feared the tide was coming. Sasha Green never believed in coincidence, especially not when it came to Damon Langford. Ever since Isabella's sentencing, something had gnawed at her. She knew Isabella better than anyone, her integrity, her caution, her obsession with detail. The woman she called her best friend would never knowingly engage in fraud, let alone at the scale described in court. So why had the prosecutors barely mentioned Damon during trial? Why was his name scrubbed so clean from all public records tied to the company? Sasha, now working as an investigator for a civil rights legal firm, decided to dig. Late into the night, she combed through public filings, tax documents, corporate ownership registries, and she began to find inconsistencies. Shell companies with matching addresses, a nonprofit linked to Isabella's social security number, business licenses dated after she'd been imprisoned but still signed in her name. A cold rage began to boil. Someone had worked very hard to erase Damon's fingerprints. But Sasha knew how to uncover ghosts. It wasn't just the paperwork. Sasha began noticing curious changes in Damon's public persona. He now marketed himself as a self-reinvention guru, preaching resilience after betrayal, yet never mentioning who betrayed him. In one particular interview, he stated, "When you build your vision, you'll be tested. Sometimes even by those closest to you." The wording hit Sasha like a punch to the stomach. That was Isabella's phrase, her exact quote from a nonprofit speech 2 years ago. Damon had stolen it, twisted it, and paraded it as his own. The final straw came when Sasha discovered a partnership between Langford Media and a fashion company co-founded by none other than Rebecca Carter. Seeing the sisters' names, one disgraced, the other celebrated, side by side on entirely opposite ends of justice, fueled her determination. She remembered the way Rebecca had cried at Isabella's trial, how she had once claimed to be blindsided by her sister's actions. It had all been a performance. Convinced she was standing on the edge of something massive, Sasha reached out to Caleb Carter. But his phone was disconnected. Through mutual friends, she learned he had dropped out of university and worked night shifts at a printing warehouse. When she found him, he was hostile and broken. "My sisters ruined everything," he said, his eyes hollow. "I don't talk to either of them anymore." But when Sasha showed him photos from Damon's latest event, where Rebecca and Damon appeared hand in hand as co-founders of a Women in Innovation program, his expression faltered. Something clicked. Caleb whispered, "Bella never would have let this happen. Something's wrong." That was all Sasha needed. She sent an inquiry to Ashford Federal to request visitation with Isabella. If no one else would fight to uncover the truth, then Sasha would. And she wasn't going to stop until every lie Damon Langford ever told was exposed, no matter who stood in her way. Caleb Carter had never felt more invisible. At 24, he found himself floating through life like a ghost, swallowed by grief, debt, and confusion. After their mother died, everything had collapsed, his tuition payments bounced, scholarships were revoked, and the weight of his last name felt like a curse. People at school whispered about Isabella's conviction. Professors stopped calling on him. He took on a janitorial job at a community center just to afford rent in a shared basement unit. Though he tried to stay neutral between his sisters, something about Rebecca's behavior always struck him as too clean, too rehearsed. Every time he called her, she was either on a press tour or too busy with Damon's next venture. She sent money, yes, but it came with silence. Caleb, once the quiet sibling who always tried to keep peace, now felt like the only one left on the outside, watching a house burn from a mile away, powerless to stop it. One day, after an overnight shift, Caleb returned to find an envelope slid beneath his apartment door, no sender, no stamp. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Damon and Rebecca lounging by a private beach in Tulum, wrapped in each other's arms, toasting champagne. The timestamp read, June 16, 2022, barely 6 months after Isabella had been sentenced. Caleb's heart sank. Until now, he believed Rebecca when she said she and Damon only became close much later. But this was betrayal with a timestamp. His hands trembled as he stared at the image, his thoughts racing back to every late-night whisper, every time Damon and Rebecca stood too close, laughed too hard, went silent when he entered the room. It wasn't just guilt anymore, it was clarity. Caleb finally realized he hadn't just lost one sister to a crime. He had lost both of them to a lie. The next few days became a blur of surveillance. Caleb, who had once avoided confrontation at all costs, found himself staking out Damon's office building from across the street, observing routines. He tracked meetings, cars, even watched Damon enter a hotel late at night alone and leave with unfamiliar men in expensive suits. None of it made sense, and yet it told him everything. Damon was hiding something big, something illegal. When he tried to confront Rebecca at a public event, she barely made eye contact, whispering through clenched teeth, "Don't you dare start digging where you don't belong." That night, Caleb sat in his car outside the now-renovated penthouse that once belonged to Isabella and their mother. He stared up at the lights and made a silent promise to himself and to the sister they had all failed: "I will find the truth, even if it breaks me." And with that, Caleb, formerly the quiet one, became a man on a mission. Isabella Carter stepped out of Ashford Federal Correctional Facility beneath a pale gray sky that mirrored the emptiness in her chest. No one was waiting, no familiar face, no warm embrace, not even a simple ride home. She clutched a small duffel bag that held everything she now owned: 2 prison-issued outfits, her inmate journal, and the old audio recording she'd smuggled years ago, Damon's voice pleading with her to take the fall. That recording was her only lifeline, her only piece of truth. The air smelled different, almost sterile. The world had moved on without her. She took a cab to her old apartment only to find it was no longer hers. The building manager didn't recognize her and said the place had been sold a year ago. As she stood in the doorway that once held her laughter, dreams, and memories, she felt like a stranger in her own life. 3 years had passed, and yet her name had been erased. Determined to find answers, Isabella used the last of her savings to trace Damon's whereabouts. A former client from the therapy center, now working in social housing, told her quietly that Damon and Rebecca lived in a luxury estate in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. Isabella stood across the street, hidden beneath a scarf and sunglasses, as she watched a black SUV pull into the driveway. Her breath caught in her throat. There was Damon, well-dressed, radiating success, and beside him, descending from the passenger side, was Rebecca. Pregnant. Laughing. Wearing the diamond ring Damon once promised to her. Isabella's feet felt like cement. She stumbled forward, hoping, foolishly, maybe, that they would see her and remember. But when she crossed the street and called Damon's name, he blinked, then narrowed his eyes like she was a stranger. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice low and vicious. "You shouldn't be here. You're a criminal. We don't know you anymore." And just like that, she waved for security. Within minutes, Isabella was being escorted off the property by 2 guards while Damon and Rebecca stood behind the gate, arm in arm, like royalty dismissing the help. Her ears rang with the sound of humiliation. The world tilted, and her stomach churned, not just from the rejection, but from the betrayal playing on repeat in her head. They had conspired to destroy her. Used her. Banished her. As she stumbled to the curb, she nearly collapsed from the weight of it all. But even in her daze, she felt the hard shape of something in her pocket, the recording. The one piece of the past that they didn't know she had. As the security guards drove off, she whispered to herself, "You erased me. Now watch me come back." The storm inside her had been reignited. Not just for justice, but for vengeance. And she would return, not broken, but burning. The halfway house Isabella was transferred to had peeling walls, creaky beds, and fluorescent lights that buzzed like broken memories. It wasn't freedom, not really, but it was a step closer to reclaiming herself. She checked in quietly, offered her paperwork, and was assigned a room with a thin mattress and a cracked mirror. Her first night, she barely slept. Her mind reeled with images: Damon's betrayal, Rebecca's venomous dismissal, the empty seat where her mother once sat. She felt rage boiling under her skin, tangled with sorrow, guilt, and a bone-deep exhaustion. But the next morning, she sat in her first group therapy session with 10 other women, all broken in different ways, all hiding shame behind tired smiles. That's when she met Dr. Margot Bennett, a blunt, unfiltered trauma specialist who saw through Isabella in seconds. "You've been bleeding silently," Margot said. "It's time to make noise." Something in Isabella's heart cracked open. She didn't respond with words. She simply nodded. Each day brought new layers of healing and pain. Dr. Margot didn't sugarcoat anything. In their one-on-one sessions, she made Isabella relive the betrayal, recount the manipulation, describe the day of her arrest and the aftermath in excruciating detail. "You didn't fail," she told her. "You were used. There's a difference." Isabella started journaling again, this time not as a prisoner, but as a woman finding her voice. She documented timelines, names, passwords she remembered from Damon's laptop, things he whispered in his sleep, names of associates. At night, she replayed the old voicemail from Damon, sometimes just to remind herself she hadn't imagined it all. She began listening to podcasts about financial crimes and whistleblower stories. One voice stood out: Harvey Geller, an ex-con turned advocate, known for calling out corrupt corporations. His words, sharp, unfiltered, and often painfully real, gave her fuel. She wrote to him anonymously. Days later, he responded, "I've heard worse. But yours sounds like something worth burning down." Harvey and Isabella began exchanging encrypted emails. She told him her story under a pseudonym. He offered strategies, questions to ask, and connections he had in legal circles. He also introduced her to a network of whistleblowers who'd reinvented themselves, people like her, branded by crime, but unbroken by it. Meanwhile, Isabella kept attending therapy and slowly began to shed the skin that Damon and Rebecca had wrapped her in. She cut her hair short, changed her wardrobe, and even altered her voice tone. She was no longer Isabella Carter, the woman who gave everything and lost it all. She was something else now, sharper, colder, patient. And she had a plan. "Don't go back as yourself," Margot advised her. "Go back as their reckoning." Isabella smiled, not from joy, but from clarity. She was not returning to beg. She was returning to destroy. Quietly. Precisely. And on her terms. Mira Vance. That was the name on the resume Isabella submitted to Langford Media Group, carefully crafted with the help of Harvey's network and her own prison-earned resilience. She now wore auburn shoulder-length hair, subtle makeup that contoured her cheekbones into an entirely new structure, and contact lenses that softened the sharpness of her eyes. Her voice had been trained through hours of vocal mimicry and dialect tutorials, no longer the sweet, clear Boston accent that once said "I do" to a lie, but now a smooth, neutral tone with a touch of corporate grace. Damon Langford's company, now expanded into a multi-department media giant, was hiring a new executive assistant. Isabella, as Mira, sailed through the online assessments, fabricated references, and virtual interviews. 2 weeks later, she received the acceptance email. Just like that, she had been hired to work for the man who sold her soul, and he had no idea the devil was now seated at his right hand. Walking into Langford Media's downtown office for the first time felt like entering a kingdom built from her bones. The lobby still bore architectural sketches she once helped Damon draft. The slogan on the wall, "Stories That Matter," was something she'd once scribbled in her old notebook during a brainstorming session, long before her fall. Isabella kept her posture poised, her smile gentle, and her eyes scanning everything. Damon passed her in the hallway on the third day, his cologne the same, his arrogance deeper. He looked at her once, paused, and simply said, "You're new, right?" She nodded. "Mira Vance, sir, it's a privilege." He moved on without another word. Behind her calm expression, Isabella's heart thundered like a war drum. By the second week, she had access to his calendar, his office files, and, most importantly, his late-night confidential emails. She started copying documents, transferring them to encrypted drives, and piecing together the empire's rotten foundation, brick by stolen brick. Rebecca, now heavily pregnant and flaunting a designer maternity line she co-founded with Damon, strutted through the office like a queen. The staff clearly loathed her. She barked orders, fired assistants on whims, and threw tantrums over minor issues. Yet Damon indulged her like a business partner he couldn't afford to lose. Isabella, beneath her disguise, studied them both like subjects in a psychological trial. She noticed everything: how Damon still used Isabella's old motivational quotes in boardroom speeches, how Rebecca always avoided the 7th-floor balcony where the three of them once watched fireworks, and how both of them jumped when someone mentioned Sasha's blog. Every detail was a puzzle piece. Every password she decoded, every transaction she traced, every hidden account she uncovered, moved her closer. Isabella no longer cried when she thought about what was stolen. She took notes. The woman they discarded had become their shadow. And shadows, when given purpose, become storms. Caleb Carter hadn't stepped foot inside a corporate office in over a year, but curiosity brought him to Langford Media on a rainy Thursday afternoon. A friend of a friend tipped him off about an open contract writing position, and though he doubted Damon would even allow his application past the first filter, something compelled him to walk in. As he waited in the reception area, flipping through a press kit, a voice floated down the hallway, poised, elegant, and eerily familiar. He glanced up and saw her. Mira Vance, the assistant had said. But Caleb's breath caught as the woman passed him. Her posture, her hands, even the tilt of her head, it couldn't be. After the interview, he waited outside, rain soaking his hoodie. When she finally exited through the glass doors, he stepped into her path. "Isabella," he whispered. She froze. The rain didn't matter. Their eyes locked, for the first time in over 3 years. The reunion was silent at first. She didn't cry. Neither did he. But they stood together under a streetlight, soaked to the bone, trembling not from cold, but from all the unspoken words between them. Finally, she nodded. "Yes. It's me. But not the same me you remember." Caleb swallowed hard, ashamed. He had believed Rebecca. Believed Damon. Believed that Isabella had willingly committed the crimes and abandoned them all. "I should have come," he said, voice cracking. "I should have asked more questions." She didn't berate him. Instead, she handed him a flash drive. "This is everything I've collected so far: Damon's transactions, offshore accounts, employee hush funds. I've been building a case." Quietly. Caleb looked at her like he was seeing a ghost with a mission. "Then let's finish it," he said. That night, they stayed up in a diner booth until sunrise, whispering plans between sips of coffee and silence. A bond began to repair, slowly, but fiercely. Caleb, once the shy and withdrawn sibling, became her co-strategist. He uncovered a copy of their late mother's handwritten will, never filed, but notarized, that clearly left the family home to Isabella, not to Rebecca, who had sold it after their mother's death. He tracked down disgruntled former employees of Langford Media, helped record statements, and even got a private investigator to start trailing Damon's mysterious late-night meetings. Isabella gave him access to a burner laptop filled with encrypted notes. Together, they assembled evidence like a pair of revolutionaries in the dark. The deeper they went, the uglier it got. There were payments to shell companies tied to political influencers, blackmail trails, and even a bribery attempt tied to Isabella's original judge. "This isn't just about us anymore," Caleb said one evening. "This is systemic." Isabella nodded. "But it started with us. And it'll end with us." For the first time since prison, she didn't feel alone. She felt ready. The gala was the crown jewel of Langford Media's year, an extravagant charity event hosted under glittering chandeliers at the Paramount Grand Hotel. It was meant to celebrate women in innovation, complete with media coverage, influencers, politicians, and industry elites. Damon wanted prestige. Rebecca wanted attention. Neither of them suspected that their perfectly orchestrated evening would become the site of their downfall. Isabella, still in disguise as Mira Vance, had worked closely on the planning committee, slipping past every security checkpoint with forged credentials and flawlessly faked grace. She walked the ballroom as a silent architect of chaos, every step a prelude to vengeance. She'd installed a malware-infected USB into the master control panel earlier that day. It was timed, down to the second. The projector would play a very different presentation than the one Damon had rehearsed. And when it did, it wouldn't just ruin reputations, it would ignite an inferno no one could escape. The event began with polished speeches and champagne toasts. Damon grinned beneath the spotlight, speaking of resilience and rebirth, while Rebecca stood beside him, radiant in a sequined emerald gown, pregnant and smug. As the lights dimmed and the screen behind them flickered to life, murmurs rose from the crowd. The company's sizzle reel never played. Instead, surveillance footage spliced together by Caleb rolled across the screen, clips of Damon whispering in corners, documents showing offshore transfers, and a distorted but unmistakable audio recording of him telling Isabella, "If you take the fall, we'll be unstoppable. Trust me, I'll fix everything." Gasps echoed across the room. Then, another clip, Rebecca's voice, calmly saying, "She's too soft. She'll do it. She always does." The audience froze. Journalists stood. Phones rose. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Rebecca clutched Damon's arm, horror dawning on her face. Damon shouted for the AV team to cut the feed, but it was too late. Chaos erupted. Donors pulled out instantly. Influencers walked out. A senator stormed away, whispering to aides. Rebecca tried to keep her composure, but her knees buckled, and she collapsed as flashing cameras circled her like sharks. Damon screamed at staff, barking accusations at innocent employees. But the damage was irreversible. Isabella slipped out the back door unnoticed, leaving behind only a shattered illusion. In the limo, she removed her wig and exhaled for the first time in weeks. She didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't victory. It was just exposure. She still needed to bury the empire Damon built from her pain. But for the first time, they were bleeding publicly, and she was finally the one holding the knife. The poisoned foundation they'd built was cracking, and all Isabella had to do was give it one final, deliberate push. The fallout from the gala was immediate and catastrophic. Within 24 hours, Langford Media's board convened an emergency meeting. Half of the company's investors withdrew funding. Stock prices plummeted. News stations ran back-to-back coverage of the event's viral video, with headlines like "Betrayed Wife Exposes Billion-Dollar Deception" and "Langford's Lie, the Truth Behind the Empire." Anonymous whistleblowers began submitting damning evidence, everything from falsified financial reports to internal memos referencing hush payments and manipulation of court testimonies. Harvey Geller, who had remained publicly quiet, dropped a bombshell episode of his podcast titled "The Wife Who Took the Fall," sharing Isabella's story, voice disguised, with heartbreaking narration. He detailed how Damon and Rebecca had orchestrated everything, how Isabella had been used as a pawn, and how the world ignored her for 3 years. Downloads skyrocketed. In one day, Isabella's voice reached over 5 million listeners. Damon and Rebecca's perfectly curated kingdom was collapsing, and they could no longer control the narrative. Inside the penthouse, chaos consumed the couple. Rebecca spiraled, slamming her phone against the wall as voicemail after voicemail came in from brand partners severing ties. Her social media sponsorships were canceled, her fashion line blacklisted. Damon, on the other hand, responded with cold calculation. He called in favors, tried bribing PR firms, and even attempted to contact media owners directly. But his empire, once built on charm and manipulation, had no more shields left. The staff at Langford Media began quitting in droves. Journalists camped outside the office, hurling questions and snapping photos. Rebecca blamed Damon for not preparing better. Damon blamed Rebecca for being careless. The tension escalated until Rebecca, visibly pregnant and enraged, slapped Damon across the face during a press meeting on camera. The image went viral within minutes. Public sympathy for her vanished, and Damon's credibility was unsalvageable. But amid the wreckage, Isabella stayed hidden, watching their undoing unfold exactly as she had planned. Meanwhile, Sasha Green emerged from the shadows with her own ammunition. She launched the Carter Files, an exposé web series diving deep into the case with legal documents, interviews from former employees, and behind-the-scenes footage from the therapy center where Isabella once worked. Episode by episode, she exposed the entire fraud trail. The world now saw Isabella not as a convict, but as a survivor, a victim of a masterfully executed betrayal. Rebecca attempted damage control, offering public apologies and blaming emotional distress, but it only fanned the flames. Damon tried to discredit the leaks, calling them fabricated vengeance, but even his former allies distanced themselves. Sponsors, business partners, and public figures issued statements cutting ties with Langford Media. It was no longer a scandal, it was a reckoning. And in the shadows, Isabella wasn't just surviving anymore. She was orchestrating, calculating, and preparing for the final blow. The storm had started. Now came the flood. The envelope arrived at the district attorney's office on a Monday morning, slipped into the mail slot with no return address. Inside was a sleek black USB drive labeled "For Justice" in blocky white ink. The assistant DA nearly dismissed it, until curiosity nudged her to plug it into her laptop. The audio file began with static, then cleared into a familiar voice, Damon Langford's. "Bella. Listen, you have to take the fall," he said in a pleading tone. "I'll fix it all. You know I love you. This is just temporary." The confession spilled on, clearly outlining how the fraud began, how he forged her digital signature, and how Rebecca convinced him she'd be easier to get rid of. Then came Rebecca's voice, cold, smug, calculated. "She'll do it. She's predictable. She still believes in you. And that's why she's perfect." The audio ended with Damon saying, "She'll be gone long enough for us to start over." The DA froze. This was explosive. By that afternoon, the recording had reached every major news outlet. Sasha published the full audio on the Carter Files, synced with real-time captions and timeline overlays. Harvey released a follow-up podcast titled "The Confession They Never Thought You'd Hear." Within hours, it was trending worldwide. The world reacted with disbelief, fury, and heartbreak. Hashtags like #JusticeForIsabella and #LangfordConfession flooded social media. The recording was admissible in court, and the DA's office moved swiftly to reopen the case. Prosecutors filed for immediate reconsideration of Isabella's conviction and issued arrest warrants for both Damon Langford and Rebecca Carter. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, demanding accountability. Talk shows, legal panels, and morning television dissected every word of the recording. For the first time, the world truly heard Isabella, not through her tears, not through silence, but through the raw, unfiltered betrayal that echoed in Damon's voice. She had given them the weapon. And now, it was delivering justice. Inside the penthouse, Damon raged like a wounded predator. He smashed furniture, shouted into phones, and threatened to sue every media outlet airing the recording. But panic began to set in. His lawyers stopped answering. Rebecca cried hysterically, blaming Isabella, blaming the recording, blaming Damon. "I told you she'd come back," she sobbed. Damon, in a moment of chilling clarity, whispered she was never supposed to survive. But Isabella had done more than survive. She had built a war machine from inside her cell, waited in silence, and struck when it would hurt most. And she still wasn't finished. Because justice wasn't enough. Damon and Rebecca had stripped her of time, love, and identity. She intended to strip them of freedom, power, and legacy. As the sirens wailed in the distance and helicopters circled overhead, Damon looked out the window and muttered, "She's turned the world against me." He was wrong. Isabella hadn't turned the world. She had simply shown it the truth. The morning sky above Beacon Hill was cloudless, yet a storm was brewing in the form of flashing red and blue lights, buzzing helicopters, and a crowd of press swarming like vultures at the gates of the Langford estate. The arrest warrants had gone live, and the district attorney's office wasn't wasting time. As dozens of officers approached the penthouse, news networks live-streamed every second to a national audience. Rebecca, barefoot in a silk robe and visibly shaken, opened the door, mascara running down her cheeks. "Please. I'm pregnant," she cried, shielding herself from the cameras. But the officers didn't blink. They read her rights as a swarm of microphones recorded every word. Meanwhile, Damon attempted to flee through the underground parking garage, where an unmarked black car waited. But Caleb had been 2 steps ahead. His anonymous tip to the authorities led to Damon's immediate interception. Cuffed and thrown against the hood of a squad car, Damon's empire finally crumbled beneath him. From a quiet cafe just outside the city, Isabella watched the live coverage play out on the mounted TV screen. She didn't sip her coffee. She didn't blink. She simply watched. Rebecca's screams, Damon's stunned silence, the crowd chanting justice for Isabella, it played like a long-delayed reckoning. People in the cafe whispered, then began to realize. A woman pointed. "That's her," she mouthed to her friend. Isabella ignored the glances. She wasn't here for recognition. She was here for closure. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed her laptop, slid her phone into her pocket, and walked out into the crisp morning air. Justice had finally arrived, but peace still hovered beyond reach, because even though Damon and Rebecca had lost everything, they hadn't yet been forced to confront the pain they created. They hadn't yet faced her. And she wasn't done. Not until the truth was carved into court records and etched into their sentences. Later that evening, Isabella returned to her small rented flat, modest, safe, and quiet. She pulled out her journal, flipping through the pages where she had written plans, collected names, mapped out timelines, and poured her pain into words. Now those pages bore check marks, red lines, and signatures of victory. Yet she felt no joy. No triumph. Just a quiet stillness. Her revenge hadn't brought her back the years they stole or her mother's final days or the nights she cried herself to sleep in a cell. But it had brought truth. And truth, to her, was power. Caleb arrived moments later with a thumb drive full of more evidence, backup for the DA, should the Langfords try to twist the narrative. Isabella looked at her brother, eyes full of exhaustion and steel. "Next stop," she whispered, "the courtroom." Caleb nodded. They had come this far. Now, it was time to stand in the light and speak what had once been buried. The courthouse buzzed with a storm of reporters, activists, and spectators who had followed every twist of Isabella's story. It had become more than a case. It was a public spectacle, a cautionary tale, a national moment of reckoning. Inside, the courtroom brimmed with tension. Damon Langford sat in a Navy prison jumpsuit, his once charismatic charm now hollowed into bitter defiance. Rebecca, pale and withdrawn, sat beside her own legal team, her swollen belly a stark reminder of how much had changed and how little compassion remained. When Isabella entered the courtroom through the back doors, a wave of murmurs swept through the audience. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no makeup, only truth and quiet dignity. She didn't glance at Damon. She didn't flinch at Rebecca. Her presence alone said everything. They had stolen years from her, but they hadn't destroyed her. And now, she was going to reclaim her name under oath. Testifying was both agony and liberation. Isabella took the stand with Dr. Margot Bennett in the gallery, Caleb beside Sasha, and Harvey sitting silently behind a notebook filled with quotes. Her voice didn't tremble as she recounted the deception, the night Damon begged her to take the fall, the way Rebecca watched it all unfold. The courtroom listened in utter silence, broken only by the occasional gasp when she played the full recording. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Dolores Hampton, leaned forward as the audio filled the room with Damon's manipulation and Rebecca's betrayal. Then came testimonies from Sasha, detailing the forged documents and fraud trails, and Caleb, who revealed the falsified sale of their family home. Even Nadine, recently released from prison due to her own wrongful conviction, spoke on Isabella's character, saying, "They buried her in steel and silence. She dug herself out with truth." Damon attempted to feign mental instability. His lawyer argued coercion and business stress. But the evidence was airtight. Rebecca broke on the third day of trial. Under cross-examination, her voice cracked, and tears spilled onto the table as she whispered, "He said he loved us both. I thought if Bella was gone, maybe he'd choose me." But sympathy had dried up. The courtroom didn't see a wounded woman, they saw an architect of betrayal. As closing arguments concluded, the jury took less than 4 hours to deliberate. On the fourth day, they returned with the verdict, guilty. On all counts. Isabella closed her eyes as the judge read the sentence. Damon Langford, 30 years in federal prison without parole. Rebecca Carter, 18 years, with eligibility for parole after 12. Justice Hampton looked at Isabella and said, "You are a woman of unshakable resilience. May this court record what they tried to erase." The gavel struck. It was done. But Isabella didn't feel victorious. She felt released. And for the first time in years, the chains around her heart fell away. Outside the courthouse, cheers erupted. Supporters clapped and held signs reading "Justice for Isabella" and "Truth Can't Be Buried." Journalists swarmed, microphones extended, cameras flashing, hoping for a statement from the woman at the center of it all. But Isabella said nothing. Her silence was not emptiness, it was power. She walked past them with calm poise, her black coat trailing behind her like a queen leaving a battlefield. Caleb followed closely, shielding her from the frenzy, while Sasha offered a proud, tearful smile. The world may have been clamoring for interviews and documentaries, but Isabella had no interest in turning her pain into performance. She wasn't a brand. She wasn't a spectacle. She was a woman who had been betrayed, buried, and then reborn. She owed no one anything. She had gotten what she came for, truth, accountability, and the end of the nightmare Damon and Rebecca had created. That was enough. That evening, Isabella returned to the one place that had never left her memory, the overgrown ruins of their childhood home. The porch sagged. Weeds overtook the walkway. The mailbox still bore their mother's name in faded gold ink. Caleb stood beside her in silence, holding a flashlight. "I kept thinking about this place," she murmured. "Even in prison. I kept thinking. If I ever got out, I'd fix what they broke. Starting here." Caleb nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's fix it," he said. The next morning, they began cleaning it out. Rotten furniture, broken glass, and old photographs, all of it was sifted, sorted, and removed. Sasha helped them find a contractor. Harvey called in favors. Even Dr. Margot donated to help restore it. But it wasn't just a renovation, it was reclamation. With every wall repaired and every floor polished, Isabella stitched her soul back together. Not to relive the past, but to rebuild her own future. As the weeks passed, offers poured in. Publishers wanted her memoir. Networks offered movie deals. Nonprofits offered speaking engagements. But Isabella declined them all. She wasn't looking to cash in on her scars. She wanted peace. Quiet. Purpose. So, when the district attorney offered to expunge her record officially and publicly apologize at a press conference, she accepted, but refused to attend. "Let my story end in my own way," she told them. The media called it enigmatic. Survivors called it powerful. She didn't care for the labels. Instead, she planted a small garden behind the house, roses for her mother, sunflowers for hope, and lavender for peace. One morning, Caleb found her sitting on the grass, barefoot, holding a coffee mug with the words still standing. He smiled. "You never remarried," he said softly. She looked at him and replied, "I didn't need to. I'm already whole." And that was her final sentence. Not from a court, but from her heart. The day Isabella placed the final brick on the outer garden wall of her restored childhood home, she did so with hands calloused not from punishment, but purpose. The property, once lifeless and forgotten, now pulsed with energy, love, and new beginnings. But it wasn't meant to be just a sanctuary for her. It was meant to be a safe haven for women like her, those who had been wrongfully silenced, imprisoned, and broken by systems rigged against them. She named the house Hope After Bars, and within weeks, word spread across Boston and beyond. Applications poured in, women seeking shelter, support, legal aid, and above all, someone who understood. Isabella assembled a team, Dr. Margot as the mental health director, Sasha as the legal liaison, Harvey as the media strategist, and Caleb as the operations manager. It was no longer just a family home. It was a movement. And Isabella was its firelit core. Every room in the center told a story. One bedroom had a mural of a phoenix rising from a flame. Another had words scrawled across the walls by survivors in colorful markers. I'm not what they said I was. I found my voice here. Thank you, Bella. Isabella didn't need applause or public awards. She found fulfillment in the quiet conversations with the women who came through her door. Some cried in her arms. Others brought laughter back into the rooms with late-night storytelling sessions over herbal tea. Isabella spent her days mentoring them, reviewing case files, and sitting through hearings to advocate for them. Slowly, her pain became purpose. Each woman she helped reminded her that while Damon and Rebecca had tried to destroy her, they'd only sharpened her into something unbreakable. She no longer viewed her past with bitterness. It had molded her into someone capable of healing others. And in that, she found her truest power. The grand opening of Hope After Bars was small by design. No press, no speeches, just warmth, music, and community. Survivors stood beside those still healing, friends beside strangers, and in the middle of it all stood Isabella, wearing her mother's old bracelet and a simple linen dress. Caleb gave her a small wrapped box as guests mingled in the garden. Inside was a plaque engraved with the phrase, "What they meant to bury became a seed." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She had done enough of that in silence. Now, she bloomed. As the sun set behind the home's restored facade, casting a golden glow over the crowd, Isabella walked barefoot through the grass and whispered to herself, This is mine now. No one could steal it. No one could erase it. She had reclaimed not only a house or a name, but a destiny they never saw coming. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address, bearing only Isabella's name in shaky cursive. At first, she almost threw it away. She had learned to protect her peace with walls no paper could penetrate. But something made her pause. The handwriting was familiar, desperate, almost trembling off the page. She opened it slowly. Inside was a 5-page handwritten letter. It was from Rebecca. The words bled remorse. She apologized, not just for what happened, but for every moment she watched Isabella suffer and said nothing. I was jealous of your light, it read. I didn't know how to be loved without stealing it from you. Rebecca spoke of the cold in her prison cell, of nights haunted by their childhood memories, and the child she now raised behind bars. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she wrote, but I needed you to hear from me before the world forgets my name too. Isabella sat with the letter for a long time. She read it twice, then folded it, placing it on her desk beside a candle. For a moment, she stared at it, trying to summon a feeling, rage, pity, grief. But what she felt most was something she hadn't expected, release. Rebecca's words no longer held weight over her. They were not keys to reconciliation, nor shackles of guilt. They were simply echoes from a life Isabella had already buried. That night, she took the letter out into the backyard, placed it in a small ceramic bowl, and set it alight. The flames crackled softly under the moonlight, curling the edges of the pages until they were nothing but ash. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Inside, one of the young women at the shelter had left her a letter too, this one with crayon drawings and the message, "You're the first person who made me believe I wasn't broken." Isabella held that letter tightly to her chest. That was the only redemption that mattered now. Days later, Isabella received word that Damon had attempted to send a letter as well. She declined it before it even reached her mailbox. Some doors were meant to remain closed. Instead, she poured her energy into expanding Hope After Bars, partnering with colleges, legal clinics, and mental health organizations to broaden their impact. Survivors were now becoming mentors, counselors, advocates. The garden behind the house had bloomed into a riot of color. Every week, new hands added new flowers. Life, for the first time, no longer felt like survival. It felt like meaning. Isabella stood beneath the willow tree she and Caleb had planted, watching the women laugh together over lemonade and chessboards, and realized something profound. She had not only found healing, she had become it. What Damon and Rebecca tried to destroy had transformed into a light that now guided others out of the darkness. And that, she knew, would echo longer than any apology ever could. 1 year to the day of Damon and Rebecca's sentencing, Isabella stood backstage at a small women's empowerment summit held in Boston's Civic Center. The auditorium wasn't grand, and the crowd wasn't celebrity-studded, but the energy pulsed with sincerity and sisterhood. Survivors, advocates, social workers, and community leaders filled the seats, waiting to hear from the keynote speaker listed simply as founder, Hope After Bars. When Isabella walked on stage, the applause was deafening. She stood before the podium without notes, without a script, just her truth. "They called me a criminal," she began, her voice calm but firm. "But the truth is, I was collateral. And like many of you, I was told to stay quiet, to disappear. But silence is where injustice grows." The room held its breath as she spoke. Not with bitterness. Not with vengeance. But with grace sharpened by pain and rebuilt through purpose. She didn't ask for applause. She offered solidarity. After the event, people waited in line, not for autographs, but for connection. A woman who had lost her child while incarcerated held Isabella's hand with tears in her eyes. A teenage girl whose mother was wrongfully deported whispered, "You're the reason I want to study law." As Isabella embraced each one, she felt something stronger than closure. She felt alignment. Life had led her through fire, and now she stood as proof that ashes could bloom. Outside, Caleb waited with coffee, and Sasha joined with a camera crew documenting Hope After Bar's first anniversary. Dr. Margot, ever composed, stood to the side with a proud, knowing smile. Isabella posed for a few photos but didn't linger. She had never needed fame. Only impact. As they left the venue, Harvey greeted her with a surprise. An anonymous donation of $500,000 had been made to the shelter. "Looks like someone powerful believes in what you're doing," he winked. Isabella smiled, knowing the future was only beginning. Later that evening, Isabella visited her mother's grave. The cemetery was quiet, bathed in golden twilight. She knelt beside the headstone, laying down a bouquet of white roses and a small stone painted by one of the girls at the shelter. "We're home, Mama," she whispered. "And I made sure they didn't win." The breeze carried the scent of lavender, and for a moment, Isabella closed her eyes and simply breathed. She was no longer the woman waiting for someone to save her. She was the architect of her own resurrection. She rose, brushing dust from her knees, and walked back toward her car with a peace she had once thought impossible. She never remarried, never sought to replace what she had lost, but she had gained more than she could have imagined. Her new beginning wasn't marked by a wedding ring or a career title. It was written in freedom, resilience, and the unshakable truth that she had become her own salvation. The end.